Welcome to Commercial Real Estate Now. I'm your host, Karly Iacono. Today, I am so pleased to be joined by Principal at Bohler Engineering, Ben Crowder. Ben, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thanks for having me, Karly.
Great to join. We have a really interesting episode today. We're going to talk about all things retail site selection, development, and engineering. But before we jump in, tell us a little bit about Bohler and your role there.
So Bohler is a land development consulting firm, over 40 years of experience in the industry. Our core services are site civil engineering, site planning, and land development strategy. And I think those services are our differentiator amongst a lot of the other firms in the industry because we've developed teams that really bring us in with an owner-developer mindset versus just an engineer or a planner, designing plans. And what that does is it allows us just to get into the projects very early on, help assess risk, go with that owner-developer mindset to look at a realistic timeline, but also to help control strategic soft cost spend, but also control the owner's capital in the project. A little bit more about myself, principal and branch manager of Bohler's Ridgewood office, which is in northern New Jersey. Ridgewood is one of over 35 offices that we have nationwide, and we employ over 900 professionals in the industry across our footprint.
Nice. And you are in a beautiful town. I know
I am.
that market well. So
Yes.
Very nice. Very nice. And it sounds like Bohler has a partnership approach to engineering, site design, all the different services that you offer. That's kind of what I was gleaming from
That's
what you were
correct.
saying.
That's correct. We have an in-house planning, landscape architecture, and design team, which is something we've expanded as a service line over the last several years in particular. And that really allows the engineering and the planning to work together early on in the project. Particularly, we love to be brought on very early on in the design process to really flush out feasibility, but actually put a pretty picture and a vision to a reality for an owner.
I love it. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
I'm excited.
Let's jump in. So retail change really happens at the site level, right? New projects, redevelopment, it all starts with the real estate in the vision. So what's one thing, let's say, that retailers or tenants get wrong about site selection when they first bring a site to you?
I think it might be lack of paying attention to the existing site condition. So, you have a pretty bird's eye view of what an existing site looks at that you might want to pursue. But what's important and where it's really key to bring in entities like Bohler early on is how that existing condition is going to change when that site wants to be redeveloped. So a lot of quick serve restaurants, C-stores with gas, a lot of your fast casual restaurants want to be at that main and main intersection. And you look at an existing site condition and you assume that all those conditions of that current site relative to access, impervious coverage, what's there today can remain. And arguably, when you head and start permitting out to these jurisdictions, all of a sudden you might lose access into that site or have a restriction or have an encumbrance that's coming in from, the surrounding area that all of a sudden a picture perfect site that you're looking on Google Maps for changes as you go through that entitlement process.
And how far into the process do you find that out, right? It could be
in the picture perfect state, we're finding that out early, right? We're brought on strategically looking at critical soft cost spend and iterative steps in that process to meet with those jurisdictions, meet with those agencies, municipalities, and the like to really understand what that final picture is going to look like in that post-approval state of the site. The last thing we want is a lot of soft costs to be dumped out onto engineering and planning, only to have those things surface later down the road.
And what's one of the first constraints that you come up with that makes a site work or not work? Is it parking? Is it access? What's one of the first pinch points?
There's the simple things first is checking if the use is permitted, because if it's not, that certainly can create some complications through some of the jurisdictions. But we like to look at the outside in. So what environmentally around the site, how does that site interact with everything around it? And that's where you get into some of the things that you were mentioning: access, circulation, integration into an overall center. What is going to change as part of redeveloping that property that not only impacts that property, but surrounding roads, surrounding centers across the board?
Really is such a big picture. It's interesting because,
Yes.
we look at sites not at the same lens, from the same lens that you do, and we're looking at traffic and all these basic drivers. But how that site changes and how it then plays into the surrounding access and tenancy is really interesting. I've never thought that it would change that much, but it makes all the sense in the world if you're changing the use.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, how do you think the definition of a good retail site has changed in the last 5 or 10 years?
I think, we're seeing a lot of major retailers, quick serve restaurant tenants that are looking for that customer experience when they arrive on the site. So whether we look at a drive-through operation, or we look at the different components of a major retailer, whether it's the traditional shopping experience where you park, you go in, you get your groceries, you leave, versus you go to the site, you park, someone brings your groceries to you, and you leave. Looking at those different facets of, while they might be the same retailer, they're definitely different operations within that retailer or a different functionality of that QSR. How do those different operations interact from a site perspective for a circulation, walkability, connectivity, but also just the experience once you're on that site? I like to say, a lot of clients would always say, if we're going into a local town, code compliant landscaping, right? All we want to do is bare bones that we need to do for code. Now we're getting a lot of clients that say, hey, give us a little bit more visual curb appeal as you pull into the site. What's the first impression of the maintenance of the site that's ongoing? Not necessarily adding to landscape or lighting intent, but how can we get the best value out of the landscape and some of the design aspects of the site to really just give that first experience?
So that was not as much of a consideration in the past, you would say. Sort of the impression from a landscape and entrance perspective is something that's come into more focus recently?
Yes, and definitely connectivity.
Okay.
So if you have a pad site and, a pad site that's being integrated into an existing, maybe tired shopping center, it's the connectivity that's outside of the vehicle, the walkability from that restaurant to the main shopping center, to the main anchor tenants, that experience walking along storefront, the activation of that outside experience for outdoor dining, areas to sit, things of that nature.
So interesting. I personally feel this pain when I charge my Tesla because the Tesla chargers don't often have a good way to get to the retail or the restaurant. Sometimes they do, but some of them, I literally climbed through bushes the other day because I wanted to go to the shopping center that was adjacent, but there was no pathway. I'm like, this is ridiculous. So,
yes.
It does seem like landscaping is obviously very important, but sometimes it's an afterthought and it does change the experience.
And the EV that's being instituted kind of to your experience, that's one of the site controls and the different aspects of a site. How can Karly bring her Tesla to the EV space without interrupting the functionality of whatever else is going on with the drive-through or wherever you might have been that particular day? How do we separate and really consider those different elements on a site?
While still making them work together if
Correct.
You want to visit the retail and charge, right?
Correct.
They should be complementary uses, not conflicting. But it's not always easy to figure that out, site selection-wise. Talk to me a little bit about drive-throughs. Obviously, they are in huge demand. We've seen, just every use under the sun try or want a drive-through. Still very difficult to get approved from a zoning perspective.
Yes.
What are some of the mistakes that developers make or property owners try to make when adding a drive-through that may not already be on the site?
I think the biggest thing that we see is they over-rotate into making that drive-through work. So it's almost like putting 12 pounds in a 10-pound bag into a shopping center or an existing overall development, where they over-rotate into satisfying what the tenant needs, but there's a lack of consideration or impact to what it's going to do for the existing center, whether that's how you get to those existing stores and how that will change once that drive-through operation is implemented, what happens in those peak hours of those drive-through that could all of a sudden impact the ability for someone to access the rest of the site. Those things are often not thought about because the primary focus is the value add in putting additional pads, in the front of a site or reactivating maybe a more tired center with new uses.
And it's hard to not focus on that new tenant. Let's say it's a Chick-fil-A or a Dutch Brothers or a tenant that drives incredible traffic. That's exciting, right? And you're adding to your NOI, you're bringing people to the site. But I'm sure if you're one of the other retailers, you're happy about the traffic from a customer coming to the property perspective. But if that impacts the experience of your core customers, or there's no parking, or they can't get in because the stacking's wrapped through the access points, that really could cause some conflict.
It's a fine balance, kind of like you're alluding to. If I can get a car off the road to go to Chick-fil-A, maybe that driver then goes to something else in my center. But I also just have to keep in check that drive-through is going to have some impact to the functionality of the rest of the center.
For sure. How has stacking changed? I know we've seen some 2-lane concepts, some that have more of a longer wraparound.
You're seeing a big evolution in the drive-through operation. So a lot of the quick serve, there's certainly the chicken wars out there, the Raising Cane's, the Chick-fil-A's that are out there that, all curtail on a different marketing customer base. But those entities are also looking at what can they do operationally. So starting operationally, how can we make the time from order to pay and pick up as short as possible? So some of them are pivoting toward focused menus. So Karly rolls up in her Tesla at the chicken restaurant and maybe has a more focused menu of what to select. So now your decision time has been reduced. So you're not sitting there waiting to decide what you want. That allows the vehicle to process through, but it also allows them to prepare the meal a lot faster when there's not as many options. So that's an operational piece. But as it comes into the engineering planning aspect of things, certainly you've got the single drive-through, the more traditional. Then you've got, a lot of the McDonald's of the world and some of the other QSRs that are 2 ordering points that then merge down to 1 pay pickup operation. Then you've got a lot of the users that are 2 lanes all the way through. And in those peak hours, you've got associates, employees out with iPads taking your orders, and you're just really traditionally just processing as fast as you can through 2 lanes. One of the things that really comes up with an entitlement process is, a lot of in the industry, we say, hey, you don't design a shopping center for Black Friday, right? To allow that type of parking demand to occur.
Right.
Same thing happens with QSRs. As soon as they're new into the industry, it maybe is a brand recognition that's new into the process. Those first 4, 6, 8 weeks, call it the honeymoon phase, you're going to have more than typical drive-through stacking. So we can't design to that, but what can we do to make sure that that doesn't spill out into the state highway or have an implication to the rest of the center? What can we do from a site design circulation perspective to really account for that small blip before it normalizes with an operation?
I almost feel like, how do you keep the peace with not only surrounding tenants, but the main roadways and highways? How do you make sure that everything flows? That's tricky for those peak times. That's a really good point.
And that's a customer experience, but that's also related to the tenant sales.
Right.
If someone sees the cars backed out onto the highway, they might continue driving, and that's no good for anybody.
For sure.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from municipalities? Are drive-throughs harder to get approved? Are they the same? Has anything changed with entitlements and just the approval process overall?
The biggest thing that we deal with is a lot of the QSRs, the different drive-through operations. Everyone thinks that this experience that they had on another application or a current situation is what's going to happen with the next application that's before the board. So we like to have strong operational testimony by the QSR operators. We also like to do real live studies. So if they have open restaurants in surrounding towns, can we actually have real data to make a board or a municipality comfortable that this QSR is not the same as maybe this QSR? And how have we considered what's going on over here to then be applied here? You know, some of the things that we were talking about of backing up traffic and what happens in those earlier phases, that we've really given thought to that first step once it's open.
And I'm sure sometimes you're trying to prove how it is the same if it was a huge success,
yes,
right?
Very much so.
So
it's a
either good comp, bad comp, just like in most business deals.
Right? It's a fine balance.
Okay.
I think coming with real data over, hey, this QSR's design standard is X, that doesn't have as much weight as, hey, we studied the 3 or 4 neighboring locations and observed this. We designed to this. And, you know, in that critical stage, we've got some contingency on how we'll handle it.
So don't go in cold to these meetings. That's what I'm hearing. Better be ready, and you better have your data and your plan if you want any chance of approval.
And meet with the towns early,
right?
Municipalities early. Get the feedback, get the understanding of what they believe, maybe an experience that they already are dealing with. So you're ahead of that. And that's that early entry on the feasibility and the risk, so that, you know, the ideal plan on day one, we have a little bit more comfortability about what it looks like on, you know, grand opening.
Smart. You want it to be as smooth as possible, as
yes.
smooth as it can be,
yes.
say. Last thing I want to touch on drive-throughs, mobile pickup. This is obviously increasing in popularity. Walk-up windows we've
yes.
seen, or just separate lanes for mobile pickup.
Yes.
How are you integrating this shift in the way we I guess, consume fast food or pick it up? How are you integrating that into site design?
So it kind of alludes to what we were talking about a little bit earlier. So we have to really look at the site and those components of a business's operation as separate pieces. So if I order on their app and I want to go and do mobile order pickup, I want to make that a very smooth experience. I don't want to get log jammed into a drive-through stack that is backing up that I can't even get to a parking space to park. Right. So we have to really look at a point A being the road, point B being my destination, and understanding how we can try to minimize those areas and operations from conflicting. But we definitely are seeing that a lot, particularly in these drive-through operations where, I can order on my app very, very quickly. I can walk in and pick it up, and I still got, 10 or 15 cars that, are slowly moving through the drive-through, and I've already left.
Right.
So it's just giving more options.
And efficiency, to your point.
Yes.
Because if you can't get in to pick up your order, or you can't drive up to that window quickly, then what's the benefit? It's going to cause frustration. So,
and we're seeing, you're even seeing like the 7 Brews of the world. They are migrating to a drive-through only model.
So no walk-up pickup window. Interesting.
Yeah, there's no in dining, anything like that. So it's a drive-through only. It's a prefabricated building.
Right.
It drops in quick, and that's how they've evolved.
Yeah, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move to gas convenience for a moment. Another hot sector, lots of growth. I know a popular one for you as well. What unique challenges do you see with gas convenience tenants? I know there's a lot of traffic. So what are you thinking about with the circulation, the parking? How are you designing those sites differently?
High trip gen, as you alluded to, right off the highway. So that's one of those things where you see this picturesque site at Main and Main that's got all these existing curb cuts, and you're like, this is great. I can grab traffic both directions. All of a sudden you submit applications to various agencies, and maybe you're going to have a turning restriction and you can't capture half of the traffic, or you've got a restriction leaving the site. It's really a quick in and out to those C-stores, and allowing those to hopefully not integrate with, if it is a C-store with gas that's being placed in a shopping center, how do we really isolate that away from the means of access for the rest of the center? That's your main thing. Quick in and out.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have cars snaking through,
Right.
a center just to get to a pad site.
And have you seen the gas convenience tenants that you are working with look for larger sites? Are they doing smaller? Like, what's the site itself look like that's been, I guess, winning through approvals and matching the tenants' requirements?
I think it's driven a lot by the market. So if they really want to be there, they are reducing the number of pumps. They're reducing the size of the site. If it's truly a market where they want to enter and they feel they can pull the appropriate traffic in both directions.
So some
on the highway.
flexibility
Yes.
to make it work.
Yes.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What about power? This is a completely different, I guess, gating factor to development. Now, we're not going to talk about data centers or anything that's like all about power, but in terms of retail site selection, maybe EV charging, how is power availability playing into this discussion?
I think what we're seeing is investigating that very early on. Right now, you've got significant leads in many power companies and jurisdictions just to get a transformer. And then you mentioned EV. How does that integrate? Is that on the same panel as the main retail tenant, or is that something separate from a service perspective? So really getting ahead of that, you don't want to be putting a shovel in the ground and haven't talked to the power company yet, because ultimately you might be in a situation where your operation is going to be on a generator or delaying grand opening because you have such long lead times across the board.
That's just one more piece.
Yes, very much so.
Looking back again, let's say 5-10 years, what are some of the factors that have really had a ripple effect of change of site design? We've got like stormwater management. We talked about access. Like there's so many things that go into this.
Mm-hmm.
What's changed significantly?
I think you've got a lot of tired centers that have just excess parking. Maybe they were developed back in the day where they had to meet a very high parking ratio. You also have centers that have concentrated access points. So when I enter the site, maybe all of the traffic has to get to the front drive aisle across all the stores. So you now have all this traffic focused there where you have your biggest pedestrian customer activity, where looking at opportunities to load that parking lot a little bit more evenly, through additional curb cuts or modifications inside, creates just a little bit more functionality of the center. And as you look to implement a pad site, you split up a big box anchor retail into multiple tenants. Those are all really big, important pieces. And that also allows that connectivity and that experience when you're in that center to just get a little bit better. So you're not doing S curves all the way around to get to the different users in a center.
I think that's partially because of our focus on efficiency. That's, continued to intensify. Mm-hmm. When I think of what you just described, this huge parking field, the few access points, that's like the old mall model, open air or otherwise, right? You drive in, you park, and then you just walk around and you're going to multiple tenants and you're, there for a while. Yes. Now we want to get to the tenant or two tenants that we want to visit for whatever reason and get out. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have that quick pathway, that can really affect the customer experience. So yes, I think you're right in that just redesigning how we access the individual tenants for efficiency and a better experience is probably very much in focus. But boy, I bet that gets complicated, especially when you're carving out new out parcels and
very much so.
Right.
But we're also seeing
a drive-through in the middle. Sorry.
Yeah, no. And it's also about, we're seeing a lot of the restaurant tenants that are going in. They want that outdoor seating, that outdoor dining, the ability to just have a functional space that you want to be in on the outside of a center, a gathering point. Again, that outdoor eating, how does that all integrate relative to parking so that I can go eat, but then I could also very easily walk to something else with not having to think about moving my car?
I didn't even think about the outdoor eating, but what an interesting add-on, because you want that to be an enjoyable experience too. You can't just plop the outdoor eating in the middle of the parking, right? You've got to consider the landscaping and the access and safety. You don't want cars driving like right up to it.
Yes.
Right. what sort of tenants, I guess, obviously restaurants, but what sort of tenants have you seen add that on later? Is that something that you guys have done?
Yeah, you're seeing a lot of the, whether it's a coffee shop or just your quick sub shops, things like that are just wanting to add a small area for someone to sit outside. But you alluded to it very well. We also need to promote a safe area for that to occur. When you integrate that into a parking lot, areas where you have a lot of cars coming in at one time, we really have to give consideration to that. And how can you utilize that with a streetscape or a storefront improvement? That's where some of these things, looking at it early on, where, we're engineers, but at Bohler, we also have a planning, landscape architecture, and design team that's really looking at how you can blend those two areas to really activate them for the purpose of the experience. But we also need to make sure that it makes sense.
I'm sold on landscape design. I don't think I really thought about how important this was to the whole experience, safety, flow, the consumer experience until this conversation. It just seems like an afterthought. And now I feel like we should start with that. We got to lead with that.
We could. Yeah. And that's, that there's a lot of mall redevelopment going on right now.
Right.
And the mall redevelopment is, how do we flip the inside to the out?
Right.
Instead of walking inside and having a long corridor and a food court, how do we flip that to the outside? How do I access that Lululemon? How do I access that tenant from the outside? And then while I'm there, can I create a space that is passive where someone could sit? I could grab something to eat and I could sit down. It then becomes more of an experience trip versus just going to the mall.
And you can really tell what centers have had this amount of thought and work put into them and those that haven't.
Yeah, and it shows.
Huge difference. It really does show.
Yes.
Very significant. And I think that affects, that affects long-term value, and it affects what sort of tenants you can attract and retain. So it's probably a good deal of money up front to try to flip them all outside in or inside out, I guess. But that's your stickiness long-term.
Very much
the
so.
Asset. So it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me about big box. So there's been a few vacancies, right? Some bankruptcies, some repositioning, often to the positive for landlords because rents have been able to be boosted. So it's not necessarily a negative, but there are some challenges when repositioning big box. So what are some of the, I guess, unique challenges to a big box space that you wouldn't have in a different type of site repositioning?
I think, what we're seeing is a lot of those big boxes being chopped up, right? 3, 4, 5 different tenants. And that certainly brings in all the things in the engineering realm of your accessible parking, your walkability, how is your parking distributed to, accommodate those different tenants that are in that space. I think we're seeing also a lot of, maybe the big boxes that are, going dark is they're not staying relevant with the times. There's a lot of the big box retailers out there that are evolving, right, with the traditional shopping experience, but also the ability to order, go pick it up, have someone bring it to your car and you leave. The ability to not even leave your house because it's being fulfilled in the store close by. They're evolving and, keeping up with the times. And I think that's what, we're seeing with a lot of these other groups, that are anchoring these tenants in these shopping centers.
So when you divide it up, are you leaving some frontage and then taking the back space for something else, maybe distribution? Or are you seeing more big box being kind of divided down the middle? So there is some space in the back that maybe that same tenant uses for distribution, but it's not as separate.
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
We're also seeing, that big box completely going away in a center. Whether you are in a municipality or a town that's looking to bring in a little bit more mixed use, multifamily, going vertical. When you bring the residents, or what we like to say, the walking wallets, that
catchy,
that activates some of your retail, across the space. So we're seeing whether it's an old mall that's being redeveloped, or maybe you have, one side of an overall center. How can this become a mixed use piece?
And that's not always the answer, although it's the most fun to talk about, I
think,
is. Right? Because they're the most interesting projects to point to.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite project that you want to mention?
We did a project for Garden Homes in Springfield, New Jersey. Very similar. We had a multifamily development that was pushed right up against the street, ground floor retail, and then a bunch of townhouses positioned in the back. And like I said, the walking wall, it's Springfield Avenue in Springfield, New Jersey, and the border of Milburn, needed some more people on the street. And I think that residential allowed a lot of that retail on that retail corridor to revitalize itself.
Was that project retail only before, or was that a ground up?
It used to be a former Saks Fifth Avenue department store.
Okay. Yeah. So it really was
a true
conversion.
That was a true take this down, redevelop it.
I bet you have some great before and after pictures.
I do.
For that one.
Yes.
Very nice.
Check it out.
I will. Very nice. What other categories are you seeing expand right now? Or I guess, what are some of your most active tenants, if you can share, or if not, categories that's keeping you busy?
We are still on the car wash trend.
Okay.
For sure in the industry, you're seeing those getting
haven't built them all? There's still more to be built?
There's still more, yeah.
Okay,
cars still need to get cleaned. They're still around. We are still very involved with the chicken wars across the way. I was kind of alluding to that a little bit earlier.
Nice.
And we have our big box retailers out there, whether it's a Walmart or some of the others that are looking to evolve with the times across the way with online pickup and delivery, different modes of getting groceries to your house.
Are you seeing ground up development come back? That was pretty challenging for the last, 3-4 years, but feels like it's easing a little bit, or is most of your work repositioning?
I would say most is repositioning right now. We're not seeing too much just straight ground up, particularly of the big box variety. A lot of it is planting that pad site or getting that value add into an existing center, or repositioning tenants that are within that center to either flip that activation to the outside or just adding some other component to the center.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Any parting words of advice for maybe newer developers or landlords as they're thinking about engineering, site selection, anything under your purview as it pertains to retail?
I would say bring an engineer or a planner on board very, very early. Before you engage other consultants, before you potentially sign an LOI, just bring us in. Quick look. We could easily help you with, if you're between an A, B, or C site in a particular market, quickly just skim through that and kind of help you assess some of the risk, the cost, and, certainly in some of the states and jurisdictions, the timeline to get a shovel in the ground, but also to get, a final CO.
And I'll just add, bringing in an engineer early could be a cost savings.
Yes,
right?
Very much so.
We have customers come to us and say, "Oh, we don't need this professional or that professional on this project right now. We're not sure." But they waste so much time and go through so many other steps that are very expensive. Time is money. So I think that's the key here is it's about saving money. It's about avoiding risk and making good decisions, and having that advice early on just saves so many missteps that it's crucial.
We like to think ourselves as a partner to the client, the owner, the developer, not just a hired consultant.
What a perfect way to bring that intro back home. We didn't even practice that. Good job. Good job.
Thank you.
Ben, this has been really insightful. I'm so glad you could join us today to talk about all things retail site selection and engineering related and landscape design.
Yes.
Big fan now. So
awesome. I'm glad. Thank you for having me, Karly.
Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
To everyone listening, that was this episode of Commercial Real Estate Now. We're so happy you tuned in, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a great day, everyone.